So part one will explore the Bakumatsu, or the end of the isolationism period in Japan, transiting from the Edo to the Meiji periods, where Japanese artwork finally had a greater chance of interacting with the global art scene. We will explore how Japanese art changed under these conditions, as well as how Japanese art impacted other cultures and native art traditions. One cannot talk about Japanese art in the isolation period, the Edo period, without discussing woodblock and prints, and particularly the ukiyo-e style, which translates loosely as the pictures of the floating world in Japanese. This genre of art flourished from the 17th to 19th centuries and featured beautiful women, characters from folklore, kabuki actors, or sumo wrestlers as their main subject. Here we look at Kunichika Toyohara, one of the many notable artists in Japan doing ukiyo-e, and whose styles also changed pre and post isolationism, Sakoku. Of course, he's not the only one, and we could have just as likely looked at Chikanobu, Kawanabe, Ogata, Utamaro, etc. But here are just two of his works from the 1860s, so right before the country opened up to foreign exposure. Moving to the Meiji period, so here are the works of the same artist, Kunichika, but again now during the Meiji period, which stressed modernity and westernization, and it can be evidenced in the painting style as well. We had the same medium, the same subject matter, and of course the same artist, but the style is notably different, and the characterization of the figures has a new light. Women post-isolationism as subjects in pictures and paintings were often depicted to be tougher, and there are elements of storytelling or plot within the images. Additionally, there's influence in the Western point perspective, which can be seen in the paintings, as well as having a more detailed background that doesn't fade around the human figures. So clearly Western art influenced Japanese artists in some way, but how was it in reverse?
After the end of the isolation period in Japan, trade between the West and Japan allowed European artists to gradually access Japanese art. Starting as a niche obsession by some recognized artists such as Goncourt brothers, Philippe Borty, or even Van Gogh, the arrival of Japanese pieces of art influenced artistic techniques and styles. This new movement will be known as Japonism. With the European revolutionary movements in the 19th century, artists were tired of conventional aesthetics of the Baroque realism art, and they saw the Japanese art as an inspiration and a source to escape from academic establishment. In this sense, Japonism was a way for artists to reject modernity and status quo. Japan was saw as this exotic and mysterious land where people continued to have a connection with nature and faith. Where many considered the ukiyo-e simple and childish, many found great expression and complexity of the Japanese wood prints. Van Gogh was one of these artists that extremely appreciated Japanese art. He literally copied Japanese ukiyo paintings to understand them better, and he even did a self-portrait of a Japanese version of himself, declaring, "If I too was allowed to enhance my personality in a portrait, trying to show in my portrait not only myself but an impressionist in general, I had conceived this portrait as being that of a bonze, a simple worshipper of the eternal Buddha." On the other hand, the inflow of European art and technology influenced Japanese artists to adopt more Western standards. By late 19th century, the yoga movement, literally Western style painting, gained importance differentiating from traditional Japanese art. In opposition to woodblock painting, the yoga artists use European techniques and materials such as oil on canvas, watercolors, pastels, and pencil on paper. Even with the rise of Impressionism in Europe, yoga is mainly based in this neoclassic and naturalism aesthetic. As we can see, Japanese influence and soft power was already present many centuries ago, with this example of Japonism resulting in the creation of avant-garde movements in Europe.
At the end of World War II, Japan was under the Allied occupation from 1945 to 1952. This brought important changes within Japanese society. Democracy was implemented and the demilitarization of the archipelago as well. The country suffered from food shortage and the destruction of many of its main cities. After the Korean War, the occupation stopped and Japan was able to regain most of its sovereignty. This period is often referred to as the Japanese economic miracle. Japan put all its resources into rebuilding the culture. Most of the population moved from the rural area to the newly rebuilt cities. Those important social changes were translated into Japanese modern art, a period that can be identified from 1950s to the 1970s, as artists of the time tried to process the trauma of the war with the drastic changes within their society, with an art not solely about destruction but also about rebellion and self-determination. Gutai, an avant-garde artist group founded in the Anshin region by young artists under the leadership of the painter Jiro Yoshihara in Asia, is one of the most significant artist groups of the Japanese modern art movement. Founded in 1954, the created art influenced by the environment and responded to the newfound liberation from totalitarianism by rejecting traditional art styles and, as the founder would say, doing what no one has done before. Gutai consists of the character for tool and body and translates as embodiment or concreteness. The group sought modernism and an authentic reflection of the post-war human condition, rejecting representative art while championing individual expression. The group was constituted of 59 artists, all of them determined to innovate and shake the art world by using innovative techniques. A big part of their art was installation-based and art performatives. One of their most famous artists, Shiraga Kazuo, would get his feet wet, literally, in copious amount of oil paint thrown into canvases on the ground, which he glided across and manipulated the paint into textural pieces, left to dry as relics of his performance. His art is considered as one of the most visceral representations of post-war psyche in Japan among the Gutai works. From the full-body execution of his painting to the reds and blacks that features so strongly in its work, all elements reflect the physicality and bloodshed that accompanies war. In doing so, he developed his own technique of fit painting and broke away from academic traditions, which was the core mentality of the Gutai group, breaking free from the art rules. This distance between them and the Japanese art tradition made it more difficult to find a receptive audience. Thus, compared to previous art movements, the Japanese modern art period was not as recognized internationally and did not influence much of the Western world. The art was so close to the uniqueness of the Japanese post-war experience. However, this era was the foundation for Japanese contemporary art we see today. Their way of expressing war trauma and social changes were a statement and inspired some of the greatest Japanese artists of the 21st century.
So now we're going to move on to the modern Japanese art. So Japan has gradually established itself in the world of contemporary art, notably through the emergence of artists with a global influence. And among them there is Takashi Murakami, one of the most popular contemporary artists in the world. His art focuses on two-dimensional forms which gave rise to the superflat movement. It is a contemporary art movement influenced by anime, mangas, and Japanese pop culture. His work is characterized by the use of bright colors and the incorporation of motifs from traditional and popular Japanese culture with a contemporary Western style. So nicknamed the Japanese Andy Warhol, the artist is inspiring a new generation of artists in Japan, but also around the world. And today, the artist exhibits his creation in the world's greatest museums, such as the famous MoMA in New York. And moreover, the artist's influence extends to the world of fashion, where he collaborates with the greatest luxury brands, such as Louis Vuitton or Off-White. And so another world-renowned contemporary Japanese artist is Yayoi Kusama. She produces paintings as well as collage, sculptures, and installations. Her art is characterized by bright colors, repetitions, and patterns, and her works are exhibited worldwide and especially in the US, where she traveled in the 50s in order to develop and get inspiration for her art. Kusama has achieved such a worldwide fame that she has had a retrospective of her work in the most renowned museums. So basically, the two examples that I just mentioned show that Japan has a global influence and has made its place in the world of modern art by offering a perfect combination of a traditional and popular Japanese art associated with a contemporary Western style.